solving quadratic equations. They're not really called quadratic equations yet, but I'm calling them quadratics because I want you to get familiar with whenever you see a square, you're going to have quadratics. So up to this point, we've been solving linear equations, and those equations have had just x to the first power. Now we're going to be seeing x to the second power. You have done a little bit of exponential behavior, so you have dealt with the squares before. Remember when you have like x squared equals 36, you square both sides and you get x equals 6, plus or minus 6. Remember that? Okay, it's kind of like that, but this is different, all right? So in order to do this, you need to understand the zero product property. And what that says is if you multiply two things and you need to get to 0, which one of these, or what should these be, or what could these be?
0.
0. So if A is 0, does it matter what B is?
No.
And if B is 0, does it matter what A is?
No.
And they could both be 0 also, right?
Yes.
So as long as one of these are 0, this equation is true. We're going to use this property to solve these equations. All right. Now think of this equation here in the same way. Think of x minus 2 as A, and that is B, and that as 0. Okay. So if A is 0, then we don't care what B is, right? It could be anything. All right. So that means let's look at A. Ignore 4x minus 1. Let's just look at A. So we need to make this parentheses 0. What value for x would make this parentheses 0? 2. Okay, so we've already found one solution to this equation. If x is 2, then this is 0, and 0 times this is still 0, and the equation's true. So this would be 2 times 4, which would be 8 minus 1, which would be 7. But it doesn't matter, because 0 times 7 is still 0. All right, so that's our first solution. So let's look at our other solution. Quadratics have two solutions most of the time. So what could we plug in for x to make this parenthesis 0? Think about it for a second. It's not so obvious, right? Yep, 1/4. How did you come up with that?
I know the reciprocal of the number is 1, so I got the reciprocal of 4.
Exactly, right? So there's a more algebraic method to this. So let me show you the algebraic method. So you're not going to be kind of working it out in your head so much as actually writing it out. So the process is we're going to solve two linear equations. So we're going to split this up into two separate equations and solve them separately. So we're going to take the first parentheses over here and we're going to say x minus 2 equals 0. And we're going to take this one and we're going to say 4x minus 1 equals 0. And we're going to solve them separately. So you guys know how to solve these. Add 2 to both sides. And that's what we came up with in our head, right? So there's one of our solutions. And to do this one, we have a little more work, but you can see it's easier to come up with the 1/4 if you solve it algebraically, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So both of these solutions will make this equation true. Why? Well, if we plug in 2, it makes the first parenthesis 0, so the whole thing is 0. If we plug this in for x, it makes the second parenthesis 0, so the whole thing is 0. Now, if we plug this in for this x, what we do, we plug it in for both. If we plug it in here, we know this becomes 0, right? If we plug it in here, this becomes 1/4 minus 2, which is negative 1 3/4. Yeah. So, but it doesn't matter what it is, because this parenthesis is 0, and this times that is 0. So, two solutions. That's how you do it. There's 3 steps to this process. Can you see over here? Got it. All right. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to set everything equal to 0. The second thing you're going to do is factor completely. And then the third thing you're going to do is solve both equations for each what are the parts of a multiplication problem? For each factor. So we solved for this factor, and then we solved for this factor. So with this equation, we didn't have to do the first 2 steps because this was already factored completely. When we do this one, we have to do all 3 steps. We're going to have to set it equal to 0, we're going to have to factor it, and then we're going to have to do this. Okay? Let's do that. Can you guys see over here? Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah? All right, so first thing we're going to do is set everything equal to 0. How do we get all this equal to 0? Minus what?
4y.
We could do minus 4y, or we could do
Minus 12y squared.
minus 12y squared. It doesn't matter. Both ways will work. Okay, let's just leave the 0 on the right side so that we're following the same format. Let's subtract 12y squared from both sides. All right, can I add these? No, they're not like terms, right? So we just put them next to each other. Okay, step 1 is done. We have set everything equal to 0. Yeah. Oh, thank you. All right, step 2, factor completely. So, in this format, we can't really tell what would make the whole thing 0. But if we factor it like this, then we can solve both factors individually. Okay? This is not a binomial times a binomial when it's factored. It's like the warm-up. What did we do for the warm-up? We factored out the greatest common factor. Right? So what is my greatest common factor here? 4y, or you could do negative 4y. Both will work. And what's left is negative 3y plus 1. Okay. So this looks different than this, right?
Yes.
But it's not really different. So think of this first thing here as the first set of parentheses. Yep. How I got the 4y? How I got this? Okay, so negative 12y divided by 4y. Negative 12 divided by 4 is negative 12 divided by 4 is
Negative 3.
negative 3. Y squared divided by y is
Y.
y. Right? Okay, good. And I'm going to do the same thing here, right? Divided by 4y. What's 4y divided by 4y?
1.
Got it? Good question. Okay, step 2 is done. It's factored completely. Can I factor anything out of 4y? Can I factor anything out of negative 3y plus 1?
No.
Good, so we're ready to solve. So we're going to drop it down and we're going to set it up as 2 equations. We're always setting it equal to 0. Okay, what's the first equation? What is y? Everybody always gets tricked by this. 0. Did anyone think it was 4?
No, I thought
Thought it was undefined? Everybody always gets stuck when you see this. 0 is just a number. Treat it like any other number. So we just divide both sides by 4, and 0 divided by 4 is 0. Now, if this was
4 divided
if this was 4 divided by 0, then it would be undefined. Okay, beautiful. So there's one of our solutions. When we solve this one, we're going to get And it's just a coincidence that this was a fraction, and so was this one. Most of the time, they'll just be regular integers. They won't be fractions, most of the time. But if they're fractions, that's fine too. Also, this one is 0. Sometimes you'll have an answer of 0. You'll always have a 0 when you have a monomial out here instead of a binomial. Okay? Okay, questions about that? No. All right, so there's 2 ways to list your answer. Well, there's probably more than that, but these are the 2 ways I do it. I accept the answer like this. It shows me you have both solutions to the equation. Or I accept it like this. I'm sorry, like that. Or you can write it in list form, which would be y equals 1/4 and 2. And this one is, oh, that's an x. Y equals 0 and 1/3. Why don't I use parentheses here? Why do I use brackets? Why don't I use parentheses?
Because it's an answer. Oh, because you're not
Because
So when you see parentheses and 2 numbers in there, what do you think of?
coordinates.
An ordered pair, a point on a coordinate grid. These are not points. These are just x value or x and y values. Okay? Okay, perfect. So